The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Will you all rise for the Honorable Judge Maynard Bangs?
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Scream. Scream is a 1996 Wes Craven meta-horror film about a group of high schoolers terrorized by a horror movie-obsessed killer. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Scott Weitz, you're appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may begin your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor, and distinguished members of the jury. Today I'll present the case that Wes Craven's 1996 horror film Scream is little more than a cinematic yawn in the halls of the horror genre. In his attempt to craft a clever satire of slasher film cliches, Craven's Scream ends up as nothing more than a shallow, cynical rehash of previous classic and lesser benchmark films that he both derides and imitates at the same time. Craven's film breaks more fourth walls than the controlled demolition of a Vegas casino. He turns viewers into voyeurs watching his privileged Gen X parlor game populated by walking cliches whose deaths are boringly formulaic. Yet he insists that his audience pay the very slasher movie game that he complains has become creative roadkill, while filling it with characters so unlikable that the audience is glad to see them murdered just to march us closer to the finale. Sadly, and laughingly, Craven and writer Kevin Williamson built their stick figure satire to prop up the slasher genre's lifeless corpse as their original creation, meant to entertain their weary horror audiences. But they failed to notice the important difference between beating a dead horse and trying to ride one for 2 hours. By the end of the hearing, there will be little reason not to convict Scream as a derivative and toothless satire of horror films that wishes to cash in on what it condemns, in effect, convicting itself of the crimes it accuses others of committing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weitz. I look forward to hearing these arguments. Mr. Ben Haslar, you are representing the defense. Please present your opening statement.
Wow. Talk about putting a bad spin on it. Peoples of the courtroom, please disregard the hate-filled and in no way accurate testimony belayed by my esteemed colleague, and let me paint you a picture. In 1974, unsuspecting filmgoers were delighted by a little film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in which a group of teens are picked off one by one by a garden tool-wielding maniac, and it was terrifying. I can't speak for all of you, but running through the woods being chased by an unstoppable hulk of a man violently waving around a deafening device designed to bifurcate any object it encounters is one of the worst ways I can think to go. 4 years later, John Carpenter perfected what Texas Chainsaw was going for by making another slasher film in which a mental patient, similarly a Hulk, and also similarly unstoppable, escapes an asylum, dons a Halloween mask, and silently and methodically kills high schoolers of a sleepy town. Another few years, we have the infamous Friday the 13th and the many sequels that it derived, and the slasher genre is officially a well-oiled machine, and audiences could not get enough of it. But sadly, the good times cannot roll forever, and the more you try to photocopy a page, perhaps this counselor is squarely dating himself with such a reference, the more you lose the luster of the original print. Friday the 13th turned into Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. A not guilty to Counselor Rodriguez's chagrin, but still not a great film.
That was not guilty, Counselor. I will remind you, Counselor, that was not guilty.
It was not guilty, but it was still not great. Halloween turns into Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. with both antagonists being killed and resurrected half a dozen times. And this mediocrity scores direct-to-video mess such as Mountaintop Motel Massacre, Pinocchio's Revenge, and Night of the Dribbler. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Enter Scream, the postmodern horror film. It resurrected the slasher in brilliant and cunning ways. Thanks to its biting cynicism of the 90s, Scream played genre's tropes, knowing that its audiences were groaning, called it when lesser sleepaway camp sequels killed off a teenager having sex. It turned this on its head by having the characters openly talk about horror films and their tropes and then subverting your expectations. A more perfect marriage of a generation's zeitgeist and a tired genre there could not have been. And horror came roaring back, baby. Ghostface was friggin' everywhere as a Halloween costume for the following years. I challenge you to find a history of horror article where the film is not mentioned. I challenge you to have a discussion of slashers with a friend where the friend does not bring up Scream. It's undoable. The film is cemented in horror history, and we should be all the more grateful for it. Master of horror Wes Craven, we who are about to watch people die, salute you.
Thank you, Mr. Big Ben. That was quite the history lesson. Prosecution, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. So we are here today to evaluate Wes Craven's clever deconstructionist horror film in which a bunch of self-aware characters, supposedly representing real-life people, find their reality is transformed into a slasher movie plot, and only their knowledge of the genre will enable them to survive being sliced up by a rampaging mass killer. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Your Honor. That's not Scream. That's the plot of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which he made in 1994, 2 years before he ripped off his own idea about making a horror movie that complains how unoriginal horror movies had become.
Nailed it.
Objection, is it ripping off if you're ripping off yourself?
It's worse. Because you've proven you can't even get beyond your own original idea, Your Honor.
That is overruled, counselor, because even you yourself were talking about photocopies losing their distinct quality as they get copied over each other.
I'm going to object again then on a second grounds then, Your Honor. It was not Wes Craven that wrote this film. It was he was the right choice for it because he had already dabbled in metal horror a bit, but he did not write it. So
I will sustain that objection.
No, he just decided to direct a ripoff of his own movie.
Yes, that is true. So stipulated.
Yeah, boy. What originality. So if I may continue. So he ripped off his own film as a director. And then he called that second ripoff Scream, creating a new franchise to save paying Robert Englund to be Freddy again for the 8th time. Clearly a bastion of creative thought here.
Hey, man, money's rolling in.
Because that's what money is. That's what movies are about, is making money for the filmmakers, not entertaining audiences.
So you agree on least on that front, it's successful.
No, I just said he did it. I didn't mean he was successful at it. At any rate, I will now present evidence that proves the hope of Scream representing any lasting original work of cinema was lost the moment Craven made a second film that stole the satiric point of the first film he just finished. At this point, Craven was just disappearing up his own ego in search of an original story concept and ultimately failed to pull one out of his ass after all. I begin with evidence of what Scream is based on, the formula of horror films that he both invented and derides at the same time.
Objection, he did not invent it.
He didn't invent the rules. He didn't use rules of horror films in the 7 Freddy movies that he made.
No, we're going more based on Halloween and Friday the 13th than we are Nightmare on Elm Street.
Are we?
Nightmare on Elm Street is certainly a slasher, but it's not quite a slasher in the terms of like a maniac, a knife-wielding maniac like those other ones were.
The court would like to hear the prosecution's examples of tropes from the Nightmare franchise that are used in Scream.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. As stated in Scream by the everlasting character, Randy, the way to survive being in a horror film is to follow the cliched rules of horror films, which he represents as an example using Halloween as not only a handy reference, but as the defense even stated, a much better classic horror film than Scream. One of the first rules proposed is having sex get you killed. which Craven and the writer prove by having Billy and Stu kill Maureen as the town slut that destroyed Billy's parents' marriage, but raping her first to ensure she's guilty slut who must die, which is part of
the virgin, like, oh, having sex gets you killed. That was meant to subvert your expectations for the current kill that was about to happen with Sydney. She was upstairs at that very time, just about to have sex with her boyfriend. So it's meant to subvert your expectations as to whether you think she's going to die.
But my proof is that they had already committed that crime a year before the events of this movie, which means that Craven is setting up the cliche by using the cliche, and his own characters realize that it's a cliche. And if I get any more self-reflexive, Dennis Miller is going to blow his brains out.
Exactly. Sometimes they go into the cliche and other times they subvert it. So you're always thinking,
well,
okay, if the writer is aware of this cliche, does that mean he's going to fall into it?
I'd like to thank the esteemed defense counsel for making my case that Craven and Williamson have made Scream to have the game played both ways for their benefit and not for the audience.
I would argue it does benefit the audience because you're like, okay, it worked that time. It didn't work that time. So what are they going to do next? You know, it's like always shifting your expectations as the film plays out.
Well, all right.
I mean, I think the added additional thing is that the characters are aware of these horror movie rules. So I'd like to hear you speak to that a bit, Prosecutor, is the awareness that the killers have of these horror rules in.
All right. I'd be glad to. They follow the hackneyed rules distinctly by killing Casey for having sex with her new boyfriend, Steve, and being home alone with breasts. then they kill Tatum for having sex and being at a party with breasts.
Okay, Home Alone with Breasts sounds like it would be a great parody porno film that they haven't made yet.
I'm not sure how well it established that Casey or Tatum had sex either.
Well, the underlying motive for Stu killing Casey is that she broke up with him to be with Steve, and we would assume that they're having sex because they've established the have sex and die rule.
But the reason he kills her is because she broke up with him.
Because she stopped having sex with him. And she's having sex with another person, which is why they killed him.
It just says she broke up with him. That's all it gives you.
I think his attitude toward his ex is called subtext.
His attitude toward his ex is unhealthy. I'll grant you that, but he's a psycho killer.
Right. But he's an original psycho killer because he's following the rules that they say, that the film says are hackneyed and cliched by now. So
he's not really following the rules. I mean, Jamie Kennedy is the character that really knows about all the rules.
No, he tells the rules. They are the ones killing to follow the rules.
Or not. Sometimes the film subverts them.
Well, if I can continue.
I'd like to hear this defense. In what example does it? What character that you know is not that is a virgin that gets killed?
That is a virgin that gets killed. Well, not the Fonz, that's for sure.
Fonz was definitely getting it on.
Well, you know, a lot of people have sex. I don't think that it like focuses on because in the horror films, it's like when they have sex, that's when the killer shows up and kills them. As is the case in what they're trying to do with Sidney Prescott. She's having sex upstairs, so that's setting up: is she going to die because she now has that sin upon her? It's not when Tatum gets killed, it's not because she had sex, it's just because they like to kill people.
But if they're following the rule that they only kill virgins, the rule is also established that Randy doesn't die because he's not getting sex.
Well, he just said that as a joke. You know, that was like his like.
I think it's quite true.
It's a joke, but it's also evidence of the formula that Craven and Williamson have built into their film.
Well, Sidney Prescott has also survived that. I mean,
they're targeting Sydney long before she has sex with Billy. And clearly one of the reasons why Billy is frustrated from the very moment we see him is because Sydney is not having sex with him.
If they're following the rules, though, they'd be like, okay, now we can kill her.
But they were targeting Sydney long before she had sex.
Exactly. It's subverting the rules. They don't care about it.
But they can't have it both ways by saying now you can kill her. Now we can kill her because she had sex, because they're planning to kill her before she had sex.
The killers
that's what-
can kill her whenever they want. They're killers. The movie, as like far as meta horror, is like setting up that expectation where, okay, they're trying to kill her. She hasn't had sex yet, and okay, now she has had sex. Does that mean she's going to die?
But in a meta film, as you're arguing, the killer cannot kill the virgin until she's had sex.
Exactly. It's set that up for you by explaining it.
But the point of the movie is you have to follow these rules, and they're both following them and breaking them at the same time, which means their entire argument of the film is meaningless because you can do whatever you want whenever you want if you're telling an original story, not a story about following rules of other films.
Right. I feel like we've definitely covered this ground enough about the cliched rules, at least as far as the virginity goes on. If you'd like to move on to any other rules that the killers have self-imposed.
Certainly. The argument made by Craven and or Williamson is that made through Billy saying it's a lot scarier when the killer doesn't have a motive. And then he proceeds to give his motive for killing Sydney's mom. Again, you can't rely on Craven taking one critical stand in Scream because even their own dialogue subverts the point that they just made in the same scene. And if they can't take either point seriously, I find it hard for the audience to do so either.
I will admit in the commentary, the writer does say that he was trying to have his cake and eat it too, where he's like, some people find it scarier if the killer doesn't have a motive, and other times it doesn't make sense to them as a film if it does. So he was saying in that film, well, there you have it. It's both. Your mom leaving you because he cheated on his spouse with this, in his mind, hussy or whatever, is not really a reason to kill his daughter, but he's psychotic. So there's no reason, and there also is a reason.
Well, thank you for agreeing that there is a reason and no reason at the same time.
It's not enough of a reason to kill someone, but the fact that he's psychotic, and if you're psychotic, you don't really need a reason, gets him the rest of the way.
Well,
I understand.
okay.
It's Schrodinger's motive.
Exactly.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And also for a population of teens who live on horror films, Billy later states that it was scary because Psycho was scary because Norman Bates didn't need a reason to kill. Had he ever watched Psycho, he would have known that Norman is given a very specific reason why he kills, and also to do with his mother. And so the fact that the filmmakers are arguing that Norman Bates didn't have a motive to kill in Psycho just feigns complete ignorance of both the movie and the genre, just to try and manipulate their own logic within the Scream verse, as it were. And unfortunately, to intelligent horror fans watching the movie, they would already know the characters are wrong about this. So it's another reason of why the logic behind the characters and the movie is just incredible. And I don't
The court definitely recognizes that Norman Bates definitely did have a motive.
I will also see that Norman Bates did have a motive. They got that wrong.
I'll move on to a different tack since we've covered this. One of Scream's supposed innovations is that it's also pretending to be a murder mystery of who done it. We're less concerned about the bodies piling up than trying to find out who's the mass killer here. But on numerous occasions, Scream cheats on the formula that true murder mysteries thrive upon. One being the obvious technical gizmo of a voice changer box that takes two characters' dialogue and re-records it by the same voice actor in a different studio to hide the cheat from the audience that two different people are speaking over the same voice changing box.
But Counselor, did it work? Your first time that you saw the movie, did you figure out that there were two killers?
No, but the whole point of cheating the audience out of finding out the identity is to hide clues from them that would enable them to determine the identity of the killer, as opposed to misdirecting them by saying it's that person is the killer. They're saying every time you go through the scenes, one, Billy or Stu is not in the room so they can be on the box. And that's just manipulating the audience's ability to determine who is the killer in this murder mystery by making it impossible logically to assume that both of them are doing it at the same time. And this cheat is underscored when at the end of the film, Sidney talks through the voice box, and her voice is recognizable as hers, whereas those Billy and Stu, who sound very different as actors, suddenly sound identical through the same voice box.
They're both
very
male,
fair.
though.
But I'd like to hear from you, Defense. Is the movie being fair in the rules of a whodunit?
I don't
Is
know.
it giving you the information you need to solve the mystery?
I don't know that was its focus. Its focus was more on the
Okay.
horror film. I think it was trying to subvert. Like, one of the great things about the film is it's continually setting up red herrings to explain to the audience. Like, if this were a scary movie, I think the dad would be the killer. And then you wonder, well, we haven't seen him in a long time. And then there'd be a little line given by Jamie Kennedy or someone, and you think, yeah, you're right. He would be the killer. He just said he'd see him in the kitchen with a knife. So it's continually giving you everybody and confusing you to give you like one moment where the horror dawns in and these two people are coming at you. That's horror. It's not focusing too much on the whodunit.
Okay.
Your Honor, I would argue that by hiding the identity of the killer, it is trying to be a murder mystery where the audience is encouraged to solve who the killer is, not to survive the killer's rampage. The defense argues that this is just a horror film. In just a horror film, we know who is killing the babysitters in Halloween from the very beginning of the first killer.
It's a horror film with a delightful, little flavor to it.
Sure. We know that Freddy Krueger...
I stipulate the prosecution's point. This part of the fun of Scream and the whole franchise is trying to figure out who the killer is.
I mean, yeah, it takes it, but I think it's leaning on the slasher film more than it is the whodunit. The whodunit is like the thing that keeps you engaged because you know all these people. It has to be one of them. I think the fact that it was like the first one to say, oh, there were two killers. I mean, that's something you weren't even expecting because it subverted the trope of it's, Jason, it's Michael Myers.
Well, I'd agree that it subverts the trope. The problem is it cheats to accomplish that by disabling the audience from getting clues that would reveal the killer until the very end when they choose to do it.
I think if you watch the opening scene like close enough, you'd think there's no way one person could do all this. One person couldn't be on the phone and then throw the chair through the window and then suddenly appear right there to go ahead and stab her.
Another cheat the film makes is that none of these people notice that the Ghostface killer gains and loses 3.5 inches in height and body shape as they run through the house chasing people, which is completely illogical. If you look at these two actors, they're not built the same at all. You can clearly tell when Stu is the Ghostface killer.
If someone's waving a knife at me, I'm not going to stop him and like, hey, dude, can you stand up next to this tape measure real quick? Oh,
well,
be running from the psycho
6'1".
Again, the problem with that logic is I'm assuming these characters are stupid, therefore I can get away with my cheat, when clearly they're setting up Sydney as the smart one who is outfoxing the guy on the phone. She goes to, instead of being scared in the house and getting killed, she goes to the front door and says, "Where are you?" He says, "I'm looking at you." She says, "Clearly you're not here. I'm standing here." My point is it makes the characters conveniently stupid when it benefits the filmmakers and not the story. And the other obvious one is that as Stu is getting bashed in the head with a phone, people are getting hitting in the head with windows. They show up at school and they have no visible injuries whatsoever. And Craven even calls attention to this cheat in the hallway when Stu picks up Tatum's hand mirror and is looking at his forehead for bruises and cuts that should be on his forehead, and they are completely invisible, which just destroys the logic of even anyone fighting back against these killers, because somehow their little fake costume just prevents them from being injured by the physical universe. That's just a logic cheat that doesn't stand out in the moment, but they compile up through the film that just loses integrity as telling this type of murder mystery.
What do you have to say about that defense? The killer's never shown
Vanity, thy name is Stu. I don't know. I think that he has a costume on him that like kind of protects him a little bit.
It's cloth, and I'm sure getting hit in the head with something would raise a welt on on his forehead that would at least be visible. It wouldn't be damning evidence that he's a murderer, but unless he's Wolverine, who just magically heals from any wounds that he gets, which clearly isn't true by the end of the film as they attempt to kill each other. I think that, again, it's another example of Craven and Williamson eliminating clues that would enable the audience, clearly too early in the film, which is why they did it. But at the same time, they're deliberately removing access to evidence that would at least raise suspicion, even if it were, wisely enough to be a red herring. They're not even giving the audience all the tools to solve the murder mystery that they are imposing upon the audience to solve.
I think we have enough for the jury to think about on the points of the characters not being injured and the cheats. Do you have any other points about the cheats that the movie might make that prevents the mystery solving or anything?
No, I was going to move on to.
Very good. You can move on.
Great. There's a central flaw to Craven and Williamson creating Scream as a satire, as an expose of how predictable the cliched slasher movie has become as a genre. Not only because their participation in bringing the genre to that point, Wes Craven making 7 Nightmare on Elm Street films.
He didn't make them all; he just produced most of them.
He directed several of them, and as we'll see, it didn't stop him from directing 3 more Scream films after this. So, going to my larger point of Craven wanting his and Williamson wanting their cake and eating it too, it's very hard to prosecute this case when you're also participating in it and using examples of it to stuff your own storyline with plot. Again, it's self-contradictory argument that I found always took me out of the movie because, every time they show the audience, they show the kids at the party watching Halloween, all I can say is, well, of course, these kids would all rather be watching Halloween than watching Scream because it's a genuine article and
Objection, Scream does not exist in the Scream universe.
Well, I'm saying Craven is boosting his own film by including greater films like Halloween in it to say, see, I know how these films work. And my point is, he does know how these films work. And he says they're cliches, but then he includes all the same cliches in his own film, which says, it's a self-reflexive argument that I'm right and they're wrong, but I'm doing what they're doing wrong. So that makes me wrong, but I'm saying I'm right because I'm pointing that out to you. It's a movie about being in a movie. It is not a horror movie itself.
Even on the point that it's trying to subvert you, though.
It may be trying to subvert you, but it's hard to prosecute someone of a crime that you're committing at the same time.
Not in my experience.
Okay. Well,
that was just a joke about me being a hypocrite.
Sure. Well, then you're making a great association to what Craven and Williamson are doing in this film, is being hypocritical about, looking down on these films, but having made these films.
Not looking down on them. I believe it celebrates Halloween in particular.
No. But it's celebrating the formulaic, cliched sequel after sequel to where everyone knows these films by heart, and all he's doing is making a film about the rule book, not making a film about a story. He is
making a film about a story. As you just pointed out, there were 2 killers. That's never been done before.
Can you prove that?
Well, I mean, not to my knowledge that has been done in a slasher film before.
Okay, but again, I'll go back to the previous point. The innovation that the audience is supposed to appreciate is that there's 2 killers, but Craven and Williamson never give the audience a chance to realize that themselves, which is the point I made previously. If it's such an innovation, you don't have to cheat the audience to make it appear to be a surprise at the end of the film. And that's what they've done.
It's more fun when you realize that Bruce Willis was dead the whole time. It's less fun when you figure that out and then have it just, there it is.
That's enough reducto ad Shyamalan. We do that all the time. Now, Mr. Defense, I'd like to hear you speak more on whether you felt this film was genuine article, whether it seems like it's existing in real life or whether this movie exists within a movie.
I haven't seen a film that was meta in this way, maybe A New Nightmare, but a film where the slasher genre exists within your universe is something that's new for slasher films. So it's just like saying like, oh, we're in a disaster. If this were a disaster movie, this is what the smart thing we should do. If people are dropping around you, you're going to make comparisons to people who die in movies, like in slasher movies. So I think it's a very clever way of commenting on the genre while subverting your expectations.
Well, I think that if the point were merely that Scream commentate on horror films, they would call that a documentary. And you could make a very good one prosecuting all the points that Craven and Williamson are attempting to make in Scream. The problem is they're also asking you to believe that these are genuine characters, these are genuine humans in danger, when the entire film is predicated on the fact of, let's just stack up the bodies, because that's how these films work.
Oh, come on now. You don't feel for Sydney when she's like crying in the bathroom, or not crying, but, shaking in the bathroom while all these teens are gossiping about her and her mom?
Yes, but that points out the fact that Sydney is the only person we care about in this film, which goes back to the cliche of here's all the characters who are entirely ridiculous and unworthy for the story, because this is about killing Sydney. And all we're doing is stacking up, we're padding the film with other weird murders like being killed by a garage door, to pad out time until we get to the point where we bring this down to...
The garage door kill was awesome.
It's sustained. It was cool. It's unrealistic, but it's fun.
Well, I would argue that Scream is unrealistic but fun, but that doesn't make it a good horror movie.
True. It's both. It's fun and it's a horror film.
It's both good and bad. Is that your point?
No, it's both fun and it's a horror film.
But there is no both good and bad in this courtroom.
My point is that it's not fun when the audience realizes the filmmakers are cheating to get their story across.
I can only speak for myself, and the jury will have to speak for themselves. But I kind of found that twist to be surprising and in that way exciting.
Well, not to bring up the specter of the previous filmmaker, but you brought up Sixth Sense, and the difference is
name, damn me.
The difference is that filmmaker carefully laid out clues that at the end you could add up together to say, oh, that guy is dead. They didn't deny the audience clues to preserve that secret. They hid them carefully. This film not only doesn't hide them carefully, but at times denies providing them, which cuts the audience out of the film. And I never find a film successful.
So the whole reason you hate this film is you were sitting through it the whole entire time with a notepad, like trying to figure out who the killer is. And because it didn't let you do that, you felt cheated. That's the whole reason you hate it.
Defense, I'd like to hear about this. Is this a legitimate critique? Do you think that there is no trail of breadcrumbs here to really follow along, to clue you in on who this could be?
I think that wasn't its intent. I think it's fun in retrospect when you watch it a second time.
Sure, but are you saying that the trail of breadcrumbs is not there? That's what you're saying.
The trail of breadcrumbs is not completely there. It's just more like, oh, it does make sense in retrospect when you watch it a second time, but there really was no way for you to figure it out on your own.
Okay. All right. Very, very fair. Prosecution, I think you've made that point very clear. You can present your next exhibit.
Okay. My last exhibit before I close out at the end. I think there are just several errors of bad filmmaking to point out that also destroy the logic of this ingenious murder plot by twin killers. In Scream, Billy and Stu are establishing their alibis to then supposedly pin these murders on Sydney and her dad, but they are made to be so idiotic in this plot, mainly by stabbing each other to provide their alibis before they have dealt with Sydney and her father, who are still both alive.
What stupid things have you done in high school, sir? I mean, everybody does it.
That is the elephant in the room defense. That was dumb as fuck. What do you have to say about that?
I think the point of that scene was meant to like sort of change their standing, because they didn't really have a feeling about violence because they were enacting it on others. They didn't experience it for themselves. As soon as they get stabbed themselves, their whole demeanor changes to being panicked and fear-driven.
Stipulated, but why do they stab themselves before killing their victims?
Because they're teenagers and they're stupid. I don't really have a better explanation.
All right.
Well, I would have to agree with that point. They are stupid, and if we're going to compare this to following the formula of other horror films, we noticed that Norman Bates didn't trip over the toilet and stab himself in the gut when he was killing Marion. The devil didn't accidentally recite Bible passages to complete Father Marin's exorcism, and the shark in Jaws didn't get cramps and die by swimming less than an hour after eating quint. The writers of these films gave their villains intelligence and cunning, and they gave them logic, so that when they invent a plan like, we're going to frame Sydney and her dad, and we're going to cut ourselves with knives as supposedly defensive wounds or whatever, they didn't start by killing themselves, and they didn't realize that suddenly a teenager can plan to stab each other as an alibi, but somehow the defense says because they're stupid teenagers, they never realized that stabbing themselves with real knives could be dangerous to their health.
They knew where to stab each other. They're like, stab me here in the side.
Right. But the point is that these Billy and Stu were in on this together, masterminding this the whole time. When it comes to establishing their alibis, Billy basically kills Stu by stabbing him too deeply, which then ruins the alibi that they've concocted, being such brilliant murderers beforehand. And so they do
make mistakes.
The point is they aren't even in control of their own master plan, which again I think makes them terrible movie villains, especially when they have concocted this plan to establish their alibis that they weren't the ones who done it. I think even Dewey would walk in and realize that they were the killers because of how their plot fell apart just when it was supposed to happen.
Defense, do you have any kind of rebuttal to this ending of the movie?
Ace as a whole has always been sort of clumsy, so I don't buy that they were like these complete masterminds, because he does get himself like trapped behind the doors that Sydney sets up, and if he's in her bedroom all the time,
clone cell phones in 1996.
Oh, come on. The internet tells you how to do everything. All you have to do is follow the steps, man. Get
the
with
1996 internet? I don't know.
They typed it, one button at a time on their cell phone to look it up.
To the defense's point that was specifically made, yes, Sydney blocks one of them by attacking her by jamming the two door handles together. That is not a flaw in their plan. That's the heroine fighting back for survival.
Yes. No, I mean, the bad guy's been in that bedroom, and he should know that that's something she could do.
Agreed.
But to micromanage their planning to that extent, I think would have delayed the crimes for another year, and they were up at their anniversary deadline. So I don't know that it's I don't know that's logical complaint to conflate a hero fighting back against the killers as a flaw in their plan.
I like the prosecution's point, though, that that's a moment where Sydney's fighting back and she's truly outsmarted them or overcame them. Whereas the instance of where they stab each other, they're their own undoing.
No, I agree. I do love that moment where she, she's not like the weak female or anything like that. She does have some smarts to her, and she can fend for herself a little bit. I just meant that he's the character of Ghostface is often a little clumsy because he's a teenager.
And he's mortal, unlike most of these other slasher characters.
Yes.
Prosecution, do you have any final points before we?
Yes, I have one last. Thank you, Your Honor. I have one last point where I think in the climactic finale scene of the entire denouement of Billy being the killer, I think Craven and Williamson completely dropped the ball of any satirical deconstructionist point they were making by the moment where Billy is knocked to the ground and Randy says, "Oh, don't touch him. This is the point in the horror movie where the killer pops up again for one last scare." And then Billy pops up for one last scare, which deflates both any surprise or any comedy that Craven was trying to make out of this moment, and basically telegraphs the last possible moment this film could scare you, and then fulfills that given away point to where it has no humor, it has no scare, and the film just sort of ends on this dud moment of, oh, she killed the killer, and all he did was fulfill his role as a hackneyed killer in a slasher film. And they could have taken that moment and done something clever with it just to subvert the genre that they say has become predictable, and all they did was create the most predictable moment possible. I think, that's running 99 yards and dropping the football on the 1 yard line. And I think that inattention to creativity and detail really shows that, this film is pointing an empty sleeve at other films that while not great, at least didn't sell away their own ending for 0 cents.
It's just the trap that a lot of horror films often find themselves in with the final scare, because you have to wrap up the plot. You have to sort of send off all these characters that you've learned to grow and care about. And you also got to get that last scare in instead of let it, just sort of dwindle off. So I know that they did do multiple takes of that. There is a cut out there where the killer does not pop up. And they just felt that it plays better that way.
I might have preferred seeing that. So with that prosecution, have you rested?
Yes.
Very good. Defense prosecution is rested. You can present your first exhibit.
All right. My first exhibit is the opening. The opening to Scream is just about as perfect an opening as you could hope for in a slasher movie, and certainly for this slasher movie. We have Drew Barrymore, an established and well-known loved actress, signing up for this quick one-off part as the victim, and she brings it with her. It sets the tone that this is a scary movie in which other scary movies do indeed exist. And right off the bat, they're talking about horror movies and their tropes that they typically brings with you. So as a horror aficionado, you see the meta-ness enacted right in a not lame way. And it's just perfect. It brings the terror when the caller reveals that he's at the house, that he's looking right at her, and he has an intention to kill her and her boyfriend. It brings that very primal fear out in all of us, the fear of the psychopath, that there's someone out there who wants to hurt us, and he's clearly done some prep work. He's already one step ahead. If you've ever had some tweaked out stranger ring your doorbell, and I have, this is a very real terror that they're playing on here. And then he breaks the glass door, and immediately you see glass windows all around the house, and she is in no way safe. We have locks that be picked and smashed. We're not safe in our own houses. The cocoon that we've built for ourselves can easily shatter, and that fear begins to suffocate. Perfection. Pure perfection.
Very good. Yes, prosecution, anything to say about the opening of the film?
I would just say that I agree. That sequence, concept was indeed perfected by Alfred Hitchcock 40 years before in Psycho, when he cast Janet Leigh to be the banner star of his film and killed her off halfway through it.
Halfway through, not 5 minutes through.
Right. My point is we had time to care about who Marion was and the situation that she was in and how she got herself into it, versus, hey, there's a girl alone in a house, I'm going to kill her, and in the end, I kill her. Wow.
It's Drew Barrymore, though. You'd kind of think she'd be the heroine of the whole thing.
But
I don't know that Barrymore.
The problem with that is again, you're talking about watching a film, not telling a story. The audience cares about Drew Barrymore because they live in a world where Drew Barrymore makes movies and she's likable in them. In the story, she is not Drew Barrymore. She's Casey, and she's a girl alone in this house, and she gets murdered within 5 minutes.
But she made you care about her within those 5 minutes, wouldn't you agree?
No,
It's actually like 20.
we
Yeah.
never
None
got
of
to
them are
know.
teen
My
members.
point is, we never got to know her beyond being an attractive teenage girl alone in a house who's in danger. We know nothing about her character. We know nothing about her motives. We know nothing about the environment that she's living in within this school and everything yet. None of that has happened. She is just murder victim number one, and in that sense, the fact that she is bankable as a movie star does not make her character interesting or someone we should care about. She's simply another teenage girl in danger. And if there isn't a larger cliche out of slasher movies, it is that which all of them are predicated on, that here is the next one in the line of films where we kill an attractive teenage girl.
I would like to
disagree that
clarify
he's
to the court stenographer that the word used there was bankable with a K.
bankable. I disagree that you don't care about her, though, because she does bring like the light and bubbly attitude she typically does in the first, and then turns it into pure terror when she's like guessing who the wrong killer was in the movie.
Well, but that's the point, is we don't care about her as a character. We care about her as a figure in a situation. You could put in any other actress in that situation, it would turn out exactly
Not
the same.
any other
because
actress. I believe you would need someone that you at least have some feelings for before going into the theater.
I would like to challenge, though, here defense that Barrymore really was, I wouldn't have called her an A-list star at this. She was a child actress, of course, well known for like E.T. and Firestarter, but by the time of Scream, I mean, she has a small cameo in like Batman Forever and a few other lower budget films, but I wouldn't call her she's not an A-list
You know who
celebrity.
she is, though. I mean, I think that helps it, as opposed to like just, oh, some girl, some girl you've never seen before.
But I think the court has heard points on the opening of the film, if you'd like to move on to your next point.
My next point is Ghostface. I think Ghostface has personality while being terrifying. Like, I like when Rose McGowan is saying, like, should I play the victim now? And he sort of nods, or when he taps his knife on the car window from outside, showing that he has the keys, or when Sidney's frantically looking for him and he wipes the blood off of his knife in this very ritualistic way, while also being clumsy. I think he's a very unique and interesting and fun. Let's face it, he's just fun. He's a great killer.
And have you done any research? Was that mask designed for this film, or is that actually a mask you can buy in any Halloween costume shop?
I know it was based off of a mask that already existed. I know that you saw it everywhere after that, but I do think they made that original mold for the movie, but I can't prove it.
If you have nothing more to say on the character of Ghostface, I think you can present a further exhibit.
I like that there's cynicism in it, that the kids all seem emotionally dead about the deaths going around them, laughing about if this were a horror movie, and then subverting that trope. I love the scene where Sidney's in the bathroom, and the teens just don't care. Well, Sidney's actually there, actually living it. And I think that pretty much covers most of my points. Thank you, Your Honor.
I'd like to make a counter argument on that point, if I may.
Yes, please do.
I think the defense, by making the statement that the kids pictured are emotionally dead, underscores one of my problems with Scream, is that, again, we have no empathy for these characters. They live in a horror film because they are already dead. They don't care about anything. Right. But the point is the two killers are killing because they're so white privileged they're bored with life. That doesn't make them killing other people who are also emotionally dead a horrifying moment for me. I know that they are cardboard victims waiting to get knocked down, and I don't lose any sleep over anyone dying except maybe Fonzie, because he's Fonzie. But again, it is not because of his character. I do not feel sorry for the principal. I feel sorry that they're killing Henry Winkler, and that is a failure of filmmaking, because I don't believe that any of this environment of murder and mayhem and suspense and terror actually exists. Even the characters say that they're in a movie. It doesn't mean anything. This is formulaic, and even the people being killed know that they are just obeying a formula. I have no empathy for them as people Therefore, there is no horror in their deaths because I know that this is so artificial. I psychically, watching the movie, am never in their place to feel that I am in danger, which is one of the key strengths of any good horror film. And therefore, I have no empathy in their death.
I may have misspoke on the emotionally dead, because I do think like Tatum has life to her, and I do think the Fonz has life to him. What I meant was like the killers, like I'm sorry, not the killers, the students just walking around the hallways, and just gossiping about like Ghostface and like OMG, like that. If this were in modern days, they'd be passing around memes about.
Counselor, are you saying that the characters lack empathy?
The tertiary characters lack empathy? Yes.
Well, I would argue that the main characters also lack empathy because they have made Sidney a pariah, except for maybe Tatum, who does seem to genuinely care for Sidney's welfare, invites her over to the house when things are going bad. But everyone else of the major levels, including the killers, are look at Sidney's predicament with cynicism and social distancing of she's the weirdo because she's upset that her mom got killed. And that would make sense to a group of students who, as you said, misspoken or not, are emotionally dead. They have no empathy before her, which is indeed the motto of a psychopath is, you are not worthy of me caring about not to kill, so therefore I can kill you.
I think
well, we've gotten social distancing and white privilege into this conversation. Defense, I'm going to let you rebut to that point before we wrap up and we move to your closing arguments.
I think most of the characters do have empathy. I like Dewey, you care about her. Gail Weathers, you care about her. Sydney, you care about her. Of course you care about her.
Are you saying the characters are sympathetic? You're saying the characters are sympathetic, not that they have empathy.
I care for Dewey. I care for all of them. If when they're in danger, I care about them. It's the tertiary characters that are cynical and don't care, because I think the commentary of the film is about, violence in media, and is it desensitizing our youth? So that's a theme that they play on.
Very good. Both the prosecution and the defense have rested their cases. So now we will hear closing arguments. Prosecution, you may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd just like to close that I believe the final proof that Scream is a dull knife in the slasher genre drawer is that it can't even take itself seriously. It follows the rules that it breaks, and it breaks the rules it tries to establish in a story that constantly kicks the audience into the back row of the theater to remind them that none of this horror film is actually real, and therefore it distances the viewing audience from participating in it. The same way that it hides vital clues to the murder mystery aspect. I know it's not the central point of the film, but it's undeniably included in the film, and it denies the audience the clues to get ahead of the film, try and solve it before the final reveal. I quickly compare Scream to films that for one reason or another invented themselves at the end of genre cycles. I think a classic film like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein was a perfect cap to the horror genre cycle, because it's basically a serious continuation of Universal horror movies, but it adds Abbott and Costello, who are stuck in Monsterland, but they never violate the rules of the universe of monsters that they're in. They do funny things, but the monsters have serious consequences around that. Blazing Saddles is another great example of paying homage to Western films at the virtual death of their genre. Blazing Saddles is a serious Western, but it's a serious Western made by Mel Brooks, who takes a funny look at it, but he never violates the genre itself until the very end when, because he's making a comedy, he blows that apart. But he saves that for the end. He does not spend the movie analyzing Western films. He celebrates them instead. And I think that the another point that Scream was trying to make and failed to make is that Dimension soon followed up Scream with Scary Movie, which, by the way, was the original script title for Scream before the studio made Craven change it. The point of Scary Movie is that it is succeeding as a parody that uses laughs intentionally to make satirical stabs at horror films. Well, it's not always funny, but it's funny at some points. But the point is that Scary Movie, just 4 years later, was already making fun of Scream as a hackneyed, cliched genre ripoff by including their version of the Ghostface killer in their parody of it. And so that Scream didn't even exceed the straitjacket of cliches that it was trying to make fun of, and had in sense become a self-parody on its own. And even the same studio made a movie recognizing that about Scream. And of course, I think the final point is that by complaining about horror movies having too many sequels, Wes Craven made 3 more Scream sequels and a TV series over the next decade.
And the fourth sequel is coming soon.
Well, he's not making it because he's now dead, of course. But I mean, in his lifetime,
but there is another sequel coming. Yeah.
Yeah. My point is, in his lifetime, again, Scream became a victim of its own criticism by just perpetuating itself with more sequels, and which exposes it as not a serious criticism of film genres, but just a desperate cash grab to find another way to make horror films that teenagers will go see. I will now rest my case because perhaps for the first time in Reels of Justice court history, I believe that Scream is a film that convicts itself as guilty of all charges. And I thank you.
Thank you. Defense, you may present your closing argument.
If we were still doing exhibits, I would have said objection. Screams 2 through 4 are not on trial here. Anyway, Your Honor, peoples of the jury, if this were a courtroom drama, you'd have an articulate and very handsome lawyer, such as yours truly, deliver an impassioned monologue where you feel guilty for even considering that the defendant was ever anything but innocent. If this were a courtroom drama movie, you'd have an evil, domineering prosecution lawyer, such as, well, we won't name names, but, knowing he's licked, if this were a courtroom drama and the defendant were guilty, we would have had the defendant break down in tears on the stand and admit their crimes, and we've had no such display here today. We just have a lawyer here today who can't admit the truth before you all. The truth that this movie is innocent. The truth that this movie is snarky. The truth that this movie has great acting. The truth that this movie is brilliantly meta without breaking the fourth wall. The truth that this movie does have greasy 90s haircuts and everyone was sporting back then, but that is its only flaw. This is the truth, sir. And if you say nay, then I say to you, you can have a nice day and you're not invited to my birthday party. Thank you.
Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Schlender, Mr. Maynard, Mr. Rabid Ryan Rodriguez, you have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Before we break into arguments, I do have one nitpick, since we just did an hour of nitpicking. Wes Craven only directed 2 Nightmare on Elm Street movies, the first and the last one. He hated the sequels, did not want them to be made, and co-wrote a draft for the third one that was largely ignored. Okay, that's off my chest. Good.
I'm glad. Oh, you could have interrupted us and told us. I wouldn't have.
No, I didn't.
I would have allowed it.
I don't want to ruin the flow, man. So, Dylan, why don't you kick this off?
Wow, what a great case! All right, so I gotta say, Scott made me think a lot, like he was bringing up good points about, the like these are the rules. You can break the rules, you can follow the rules, what works, what not. But I think, and I wish maybe the defense brought this up, is that one thing that Wes Craven had that allowed him to do this, he had credibility. It's the same reason Andy Warhol was able to sell a picture of soup. I mean, I know.
Marilyn Monroe, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not unsympathetic to that argument, and it's making me think. But I mean, this wasn't just anybody coming in here. This was like Wes Craven. He'd proven his chops, and he was able to, is able to put a little twist on it, little spin on it. Was it a cynical cash grab? Should it have been, the heights of cinema? Should it have been a great critique or parody or satire? I'm not sure who's to say, but we're here to say maybe. But
Definitely.
the movie itself, though, it was fun. It was entertaining. I do think there were some clues that you could follow. Maybe they were not sufficient enough, but
the question is, are the clues there? Like, once you know the mystery, were we able to go back and watch it and see some of those clues? But like, how fair was it to have figured it out on your first viewing?
Probably impossible.
I would
Almost
say it
next
would
to
be
impossible.
very difficult, but then when you do go back and watch it, you can see like the clues, like when the Fonz, we're not calling him Henry Winkler for this episode, he has the two boys in his office, because there was actually two boys pretending to be the killer, to just as a prank, and so that's a clue that maybe there's two of them. Both killers are accused early of being the killers. You've got the cell phone landing, and this is 1996, and just like anyone having a cell phone is just like, it's kind of notable. It's like, oh man, I was getting a call from someone who could see me, and then my boyfriend shows up with the cell phone. But then, hold on a minute, there's this alibi now because he's in jail, and I'm getting the other call. And I do agree with the prosecution, like the whole voice modulator thing. What was a cop out? So, like, are we supposed to believe that Skeet Ulrich and Shaggy there were like practicing their cadence perfectly? It's like, what's your favorite scary movie? Okay, no, you have to say it just like that though every time. But then the other point is, which is something the prosecutor brought up, is because we're watching a movie, the voice is only the same for our benefit because they tend to kill anyone who hears the voice. So keeping the voice consistent is just for us, because they're killing anyone who hears it, like, sooner or later. I mean, even if Sidney could go to the cops and go, I think he sounded different on this call, they'd be like, well, I don't know, maybe he was talking into a kazoo, so
Yeah.
it's a pretty fair point. But at the end of the day, I think when you're Wes Craven, I think you have the credibility, you have the cachet, you can manipulate things a little differently. I think it lands better. The movie was well directed, it was well shot, it was slick. You know what I mean? It had a good production value. It didn't feel cheap the way slasher movies were starting to feel back then, and
especially in this decade.
Exactly.
They were starting to be like straight to video. Like, it was pretty visually, they were in dire straits. This was pushing it back out.
And exactly. Yeah. And this got it streamlined, it got it sleek, it propelled it into the new millennium, essentially. I mean, it's 1996, we're 4 years away from Y2K. And I think when you put that all together, like, it's not the same way. Like, this isn't like the swan song for them. It's the Phoenix. It's the rebirth, not in the same way like the Abbott Costello and Blazing Saddles were like these swan songs, which were done by people who weren't like attached to the genre in the way Wes Craven was. So I think Wes Craven being able to flip the script, turn things on his head, it's kind of like when the Bee Gees became more successful when they started disco. They went from rock to disco and got huge. And I think Wes Craven was able to pivot appropriately, but keep things very much in his wheelhouse with slashers and made fun movies. And I think the sequels are all pretty good. I think even Scream 3 isn't without some merit. It would have to be a different episode, I'm sure. But
I think that Wes Craven's probably tired of being compared to the Bee Gees at this point.
What's wrong with the Bee Gees stuff? They saw the way the die was cast, and they saw that like disco was going to be big, and they went into disco, and they were staying alive.
There you go. But what I'd like to ask is, do you think this film is an indictment of the horror genre?
Yes.
Or a celebration of it?
I think it's both. It's
what do you think it more is then, Ryan?
It is more of a deconstruction than anything, and it is a kind of an affectionate one. But ultimately,
I see Craven and Williamson as kind of the killers in this movie, where like they love horror movies so much that like you said, they like to deconstruct them, which is kind of what the killers like to do too.
Yeah, I think, well, it speaks to, like, Craven did not want to get back into the genre because he thought that it was getting not progressively, but increasingly misogynist. And it was just not something that he wanted to be a director still, but he didn't want to go back. And it was reading this script that made him think, okay, well, I can do this. And I think if you kind of digest it in that kind of headspace, picking at the logic of the twist, I mean, yeah, if you look at it strictly in terms of, does the mystery make sense? No. The breadcrumbs are there, but they don't go in a straight line. They go over each other and they switch back. But ultimately, I don't think that was the point that he was trying to make.
Almost as if two people were spreading the breadcrumbs.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, as far as the mystery point, I thought that was one of the more interesting points that was brought up, and
I'm glad we brought it up.
Yeah, and for sure, I'm sure I wasn't able to pick up on this mystery the first time I watched it, but then, you know, this time around, who knows how many times I've seen this movie now, probably 24. But this time, you know, I was really conscious of it, and it was like, there are things that you got when you watch it, you're like, oh, I should have known it was Stu and Billy the whole time, like, especially because you should never trust a man named Skeet. That was my first clue. But I think that there's something there where the pieces, after you know the answer, it's easier to solve the puzzle. But when you don't have all those pieces, it's not quite as easy. But I think of so many horror movies that have that mystery component where I'm not sure I could have solved it either. So I don't know if it's a mystery like a Sherlock Holmes mystery where I'm really trying to solve it, or is the movie just trying to keep me guessing because that's what keeps me on the edge of my seat and makes me more scared.
That's precisely it. I think Kevin Williamson was interested in getting...
I knew I was right because Ryan agrees.
He's interested in getting to the point where at the end of the movie you go, holy shit, it's two people. It doesn't really matter how it gets to that point, but he wants to know that in a crowded theater, when you get to the third act, that the entire audience is looking over at the person next to them going, did you fucking get that? Did you see that coming? That's really... I mean, and this is something that is explored even further in Scream 2, where literally anybody could be the killer and you just kind of get them thrown together at the very end. But it's a question of approaches, really. And I don't think that his approach was necessarily taking all that into consideration.
I'm a big fan of 2, but I think even the solution to the mystery in 2 is even a bigger cheat than it is in 1.
100%. And originally there were 4 killers. And then they made it into 2 because the script got leaked on the internet. But in Scream's 2 defense, Laurie Metcalf, that's all I'll say, was amazing.
Oh, I think I like Scream 2 more than I like Scream 1 because of how self-referential it is to 1. Like in 1, they, Sydney talks about being played by Tori Spelling if this were a movie. And then in 2, Stab, which is the movie of Scream within Scream, she is played by Tori Spelling, and Luke Wilson is her boyfriend, and that is so funny and perfect. It's wonderful. A couple of things I did want to point out, because to me this movie is, we talked about meta, and I wish I'd heard the defense use that more, is that the movie is so aware when we're talking about the rules. When it chooses to follow them, it's because it's aware of the rules and they choose to follow them. When they choose to break them, it's because they're aware of the rules and they choose to break them. So like when we were talking about the killers not being injured, to me, that's very intentional, where you look at all these horror movies and these monsters, these psychos, they should be getting hurt, but they don't. And it's kind of like, why is Stu looking in the mirror and not seeing cuts? Well, he's a killer now, and killers don't get hurt in horror movies, right? So I think, the prosecution brought up the point great. Exactly, the Michael Myers effect. Are we looking at real life, or are we looking at a story that takes place within a movie, and the movie's so meta, it's aware that it's within a movie? So I didn't think I would hear arguments that would even make me consider a guilty verdict, but there were moments where Scott was talking and I considered a guilty verdict. So, kudos to him. Very impressive, and I never thought I would even think about Scream being guilty. But at the end of the day, I don't think Scream is as clever as it thinks it is, but I definitely don't think it's a bad movie. So I'm given not guilty.
To that point, the prosecution multiple times had me with several salient arguments going, I can't really defend that. even though ultimately I think it's not guilty, there's enough there to at least warrant this kind of interrogation.
Yeah, there was enough for an indictment.
Yeah, definitely.
We could arraign them.
And I am kind of disappointed that in all this talk, only one mention of Gale Weathers, easily the greatest character in the entire movie.
Sounds like a weather woman. And we barely mentioned former WCW champion David Arquette.
Yeah, that's right. Star of Ready to Rumble.
Yes, exactly.
I mean,
He certainly survived this movie because he was a virgin.
They didn't really. Actually, the acting I thought was a lot of fun. I can't think of the guy who played Shaggy.
Matthew Lillard.
Matthew Lillard.
Brilliant at the end when he's bleeding to death.
I'm getting kind of
They're going to be so mad at me.
Woozy.
Oh God, I love that so much.
You hit me with the phone, dick. And apparently, Dylan told me all that was ad-libbed, and so improv'd.
Yeah, so there's a lot of the movie for me. Even I'm trying to remember the first time I watched it. I saw it pretty soon after it came out. I remember having a lot more fun and laughing along with it than I was ever really scared by it. And I think that was, I know it went for both, and I think it succeeds in both. So I'm agreeing with Maynard here with a not guilty verdict, though I tip my hat to the prosecution because, those are a lot of good points. There's going to be a lot of people coming out of this episode probably with their minds changed, but I just think I just enjoy it much more as a comedy than as a horror or as a whodunit. Actually, it never even occurred to me to think of it as a whodunit, because you never think who's Michael Myers underneath his mask kind of thing. And the only time you really think of who Ghostface could be is when the real killers, Stu is saying well, I think it's the father. And it's why would you think it's anyone necessarily? Why can't it just be some crazy person? So, yeah, I never put much stock in the twist though. It's two killers. I just thought that was fun. Like Ryan said, I would have been one of those people in the theater turning around going oh man, that's what the heck is that? And maybe that means I'm an easy mark. I don't know. Not guilty.
Yeah, when I was 10 when this came out. And the one thing I could only focus on when it comes to the identity of Ghostface was not who is that guy, it's why won't he stop killing people? I didn't really care who he was and whether that was going to be a big reveal at the end. It was just that's kind of gravy at that point. But it is a very important point to bring up, and it is something that has to be considered if we're talking about guilty or not guilty.
And here's when Drew Barrymore pulls the mask off and she doesn't look surprised or shocked. I mean, there's no emotion there. So it's just, I don't know what you're supposed to believe. I don't know why they even did that. That was confusing looking back on it in retrospect. Wouldn't she have seen Billy or Stu? I don't know. We could probably go online and they'll tell you.
Conceivably. I mean, they went to the same high school, so they had to have known each other, at least in the periphery.
Well, yeah, exactly. But there's no reaction. She just pulls the mask off, and she her eyes don't get bigger.
Maybe it's because it's who she expects it to be, which is Stu.
I mean, who do you expect to be killing you at that point? I mean,
Matthew Lillard.
Syphilis.
I don't know. I don't know.
You have to go through the syphilitic insanity first, Ryan.
Oh, that's right. Of course. I always get that backwards.
So, Ryan...
not guilty. Not guilty.
You're not guilty as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a verdict. So let's get out there and present it to that very sexy judge.
Okay. Oh.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People vs. Scream, we find the accused not guilty of being a bad movie.
Yes! Thank you, sirs. Thank you. You are both live and awesome.
The verdict is so rendered. While Scream is safe, I want to warn Scream 3 that it is on thin ice. Parker Posey gets a pass.
Sustained.
Court is adjourned.
Oh! It's Alfonso Alfredo from the Gabagool Gazette.
Oh, God, no.
Hey, that's right. That's right. Yo, Mr. Weitz, get over here. Come on. What do you think of today's verdict?
Hey, what can I say, boss? He's a guilty, he's a no guilty. I don't know. How many ethnic stereotypes are on trial here? I don't understand. Riot Doc.
Oh, no stereotype. This is my real identity. I can't believe you do this. Get out of here, you. All right, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, get over here. Come on, over here. You gotta talk to the Gabagool Gazette. Now,
you gotta. You and your sharp journalism, yes. All I can say is when Ghostface calls me, or calls you, or calls any of us and asks, "What's your favorite scary movie?" the answer needs to be a resounding The Shining. But Scream is in the top 10, Ghostface. Scream is in the top 10. And I'm glad I did you justice today. Thank you.
All right, get out of here, man. Go celebrate. Get a nice pie. All right, that's all the time we got for today.
You're stepping on my beat over here?
What?
Oh, God.
Johnny Manicotti, what are you doing?
This is my territory, you stinking pizzone.
What do you call it, Pizzone? I ought to did you get...
Scott, when I was preparing for this case, I was honestly straining, like, what ground could I possibly be attacked on? And the only thing I could come up with was, like, the scares sort of, or the humor subverts the scares. And then when I was arguing with you, you just brought up so many points where I was like, I do not have a defense for that. That is so true. Good job, man.
And yet, in this sham of a mockery, of a travesty of justice, somehow they acquitted the film.
There's more good points than bad. I stand by that.
For me, I agree. It is you're right, Scott. It's a bad whodunit, but I didn't think the mystery. It's an element to the story that keeps me going, but it wasn't a breaker for the movie. And then some of the other stuff about like them breaking the horror tropes and not being injured, stuff like that. To me, that's something that works when they're aware of the rules within horror.
I understand your point, but you brought up something in the jury room that, of course, I didn't hear because I was out buying racehorse books from the reporter out front. But thank you for getting that reference. But you brought up the idea of the horror trope that the killer is a supernatural, immortal being that can't be killed or injured, which is both true and not true if you watch the films like Friday the 13th or clearly Michael gets shot off the balcony at the end of the film. It's not that, but it doesn't kill him. Mm-hmm. My point about Scream that I think I made a few times, and I'll bring up again in the point that you brought up. You're saying Stu can't get hurt because he's the killer now. Here's where I think that Craven and Williamson still fail. They want it both ways, and that's a cheat in filmmaking and storytelling. He's completely mortal when Billy stabs him for their alibi.
The mask is off. The costume's off. He's not the killer anymore.
No,
he's Stu again. He's not Ghostface. Ghostface can't get hurt. Stu can.
So you're saying the sparkly robe that a teenager wears prevents him from dying. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Well, that's completely
Michael Myers becomes a different man when he puts his mask on.
Myself, it worked for my argument, so I'll take it.
But it was a great trial, and you did a great job, Scott.
Really great job, man.
Yes.
Now, Scott, what's keeping you busy here in these unprecedented times? What have you been up to?
Well, except for the last 2 hours of my life, I am working feverishly on my new horror audio drama called Dead of Night Radio Theater. I am now in the final audio mix of our premiere episode, which will debut as a free sample online in conjunction with our Kickstarter coming up in October to hopefully build our fan base and get horror fans to help us fund a first full season of episodes of Dread of Night.
And I know the first episode has a tremendous cast, many friends of the podcast.
It does indeed. We have 2 Emmy winners. We have Kirk Thatcher, who people will know from The Muppets, from Star Trek 4.
Reels of Justice.
Reels of Justice, Casino Royale.
Absolutely. He's an alumni of this very show. He had a podcast. He was our guest on Damn Dirty Geeks as well. And so Kirk is not only an actor in our ensemble cast, Kirk also plays Mr. Tremble, who is the horror host of Dread of Night, as it were. And so you'll get to hear a lot of Kirk in our first episode. And we also have another Emmy winner, Pruitt Taylor Vince, who you'll know from everything from JFK, from Bird Box, from you name it. He's been in
Alien.
everything.
Identity. I love Identity.
Really good on
exactly. Exactly. So he's in our cast. We have Frank Dees, who we all know very well as an artist, filmmaker, director. Exactly. We have Liesl Hansen, who is a terrific actor who is now blowing up in her new Allstate commercial where she's rolling through town with everything wrapped around her. It's adorable to watch. We have Jennifer Lynn Warren. We have Trish Geiger. We have, oh my gosh,
Rico.
We have a lot of people, and the point is we're not ready to reveal things, but we will be adding more of these starring actors in the first season if indeed we get to lucky enough to produce those episodes. So it's definitely going to be a rolling ensemble cast, and you never know who will pop up on an episode until we, of course, announce their presence. So it's the show is, if I say so myself, is sounding great, and it's an old-fashioned horror radio drama is a project I've wanted to do for 20 years now, and I was inspired by a Lights Out episode I heard when I was a kid that scared the shit out of me, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since, and I'm hoping that Dread of Night will scare the shit out of a bunch of other people.
Sounds excellent. I'm excited.
Yeah, and if the Kickstarter has launched by the time this episode airs, we will share the Kickstarter link with this episode. Otherwise, we'll share that link out on our social media when it does open up.
Thank you very much.
Is it straight horror as an audio drama?
Yes. There may be dark bits of humor with horror hosts as they are, but these are meant to be serious horror dramas, and it's very much the theater of the mind. One of my ultimate season 1 episodes I hope to record in 3D audio and binaural audio, so that it's truly an immersive experience as a radio drama play in your head, which, as history has proven, and a lot of people like Stephen King would agree with, the monster in your head is always much scarier than the one you see on a screen, because you have no defense in your own mind of what scares you, and a listener will make whatever they're imagining scary for themselves, not scary for anyone else. I think that's the fascinating part of radio dramas in general.
That sounds fantastic. I am interested.
Yeah, very cool.
It's going to be very cool. Now, Scott, do you have a recommendation for a horror movie that you think our listeners should check out?
I did. I did not know that question was coming until we started today, but I thought of a film that I just watched again on cable recently. I would suggest throwing into the ring Omen 3.
The Omen 3.
Conflict.
Which has strengths, it has plenty of weaknesses, there's a lot of meat there to either strip off the bone or enjoy for dinner.
Sam Neill's great in it.
I agree. He's great as an actor in general. I think one of the creepier parts is how many times either he or the director pick specific shots that remind you of the young Damien from the first one.
Yeah.
It's for people who are not anywhere near in age or relation, you believe that's little Damien grown up, which is all the scarier considering what little Damien did. So
Ben, I'm going to let you go next, just in case we have any overlap or anything. What do you got for a recommendation?
Since I've been recommending J-horrors this month, the best one that I know of that has some slasher tropes in it is Battle Royale. It's like the Hunger Games, but it was first, and it was good. And while I thought the Hunger Games took kind of a silly concept of teens battling each other to death in an arena, this film actually knows what it is, and it tries to have fun with it.
Ryan, what's your recommendation for this week?
Well, I have two. One's a kind of an unofficial one.
Two,
I know. But this one, the non-spooky one, was recommended on Twitter by one of our former guests and a friend of the show, Bouncin' Bobby Lapierre. It's called Sight and Sound, The Cinema of Walter Murch. It's on Vimeo, and it is kind of a synthesis of a bunch of lectures and commentaries that Murch has given over like a 40-year period, combined with his actual movies and other movies, and kind of like remixed and kind of mashed up together. And it feels like an art project, but it's a really beautiful one. And then
now you think if Murch sold T-shirts and bumper stickers,
Such a stupid joke.
And mugs.
Yeah, sure. The spooky recommendation, spooky, is one that was talked about a lot at the beginning of this podcast, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It is just as meta as Scream, if not probably even more so. Just as enjoyable, if again, probably not more so. And you get to see John Saxon playing himself. So, how can you lose? It's on HBO Max at the moment.
Oh, I'll have to watch that sometime soon. Now, Big Papa Schlender, you stinking pizzone, you. What's your recommendation for this week?
This week, I'm recommending the animated classic, The Halloween Tree. Based on the novel of the same name by Ray Bradbury, this story follows a group of children trying to save their friend's soul on Halloween night. It is narrated by Bradbury himself, masterfully, I might add, and we have a fantastic vocal performance from Leonard Nimoy. Everyone should check it out before Halloween, and it's good for kids.
Have you been pronouncing it Nimoy for many years?
Leonard Nimoy, some people say Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy is very famous for playing Spock.
Oh yes, on Star Trek. Yes,
exactly.
I'm a big fan of Leonard Nimoy.
On the Starship Enterprise. Warp Factor Neuf, Monsieur Scott.
Now, my recommendation is, I think it's a movie we've talked about, but I'm not sure it's one that we've actually recommended. But it's another sort of horror spoof or horror satire, another slasher one. And it's Behind the Mask, the rise of Leslie Vernon.
Yes, good movie.
I don't know if we've actually recommended it. I know we've chatted about it.
We've definitely talked about it, but we haven't
talked about it. But especially this month, I think you should watch it. It plays with all the horror tropes. It's basically a mockumentary following an aspiring serial killer. Well, he's really an aspiring slasher. He wants to basically be Jason or Michael Myers, and so it plays with all the tropes. It basically plays to humor, but then when it chooses to get scary, I think it's able to legitimately get scary. It's a great movie. I don't know where you can watch it, but I'm sure Google will let you know where you can check that one out.
I think it's on Amazon.
I'd just like to point out he doesn't want to be Ghostface. That's important.
He probably doesn't want to be Ghostface. No,
for good reason. Thank you.
Amazon Prime or Shudder, one of the two.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen that. I've seen the movie. I've also seen it pop up periodically on cable. So it is beyond getting a DVD. I know it's accessible and it is worth checking out. It's an interesting film.
Yeah. Shout just put it out in a really good disc.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, they're getting good at that.
Yeah.
Scott,
thank you so much for joining us this week. We had a great time, and I never thought anyone would have really any points to attack Scream on. And you came up with quite a good number of them.
Well, not with that stacked jury, you wouldn't think, but yes, I did my best. And as I said before, I could easily have flipped sides and made good points, but it was I had more fun pointing out the weaknesses of the film and where its own internal logic fails. And I do have 2 more film suggestions if you want them, or I can not give them to you.
Give us your suggestion.
Go ahead.
Okay. In terms of just sticking with horror films, which is where my mind is at now. One is The Changeling with George C. Scott.
Awesome.
Okay.
A very, very creepy ghost, haunted film. And one which I'm sure a lot of everyone here is familiar with, Legend of Hell House, is a tremendous amount of fun to, it's almost a, midnight movie of its own to sit and watch popcorn, but it does have genuinely worthwhile creepy horror moments in it. Also has some weird stuff in it too. So it's another movie that can be taken either way, which may or may not serve this show.
Well, Scott, if you come back, you can pick, and we don't have to put you up against Ben. We'll put him away, so you don't have to worry about him, and you can.
I think the jury is my problem, not Ben. I wiped the floor with Ben. I want to listen to this again because it's you guys are a lot of fun. I
get done editing it.
But I love the moments where the judges say, "Would you like to make a rebuttal that defense?" And Ben's going, and I counted a few of those, and I thought, "Oh, I'm doing well." And then the jury threw that out the window. So
I can admit when I got a point wrong.
If flustering Ben was the metric to winning the show, everyone would win. And
No,
with
but it was
Funny, you guys, shut up.
And with that, we're all out of show for this week, but we hope you'll join us next time as the reels of justice keep turning.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Later.
Thank you.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.